Pop Culture Podcast. One's called Bop Podcast, one's called Gosh Golly Wow. I'm a teaching assistant professor of digital narrative, interactive design, and English literature, long title, at the University of Pittsburgh. The majority of my pop culture research focuses on depictions of gender and sexuality in superhero comics, and I am the editor of a forthcoming collection of Batman and his supporting cast from McFarlane Press, and yes, there's a CFP on the back table over there. With all that said, when I was 7 years old, Spider-Man was the very first comic I ever subscribed to with my own money. Stan Lee was always fond of saying that the power of Spider-Man was that he proved that anyone could be a hero. Peter Parker had problems exactly like the reader, and the mask was nondescript enough that anyone could be under it. The power of Spider-Man was that even you could be Spider-Man. You could be the hero. At least that was Stan's argument. Stan was wrong. Stan's often wrong. I've met Stan, he's a nice guy. But anyway, the power of Spider-Man isn't because he shows us what it could be to be a hero. It's that he shows us that perhaps we already are. Yes, Peter Parker has the proportional speed and strength of a spider. Yes, he can save the universe, he can spin a web any size, he can catch thieves just like flies. Yes, he is a superhero, but honestly, he is also so much less than you or I. Sure, you could be Spider-Man, but at the end of the day, would you even really want to? Because Spider-Man isn't defined by his victories or his strengths, he is defined by his failures and his weaknesses. Umberto Eco gives an academic framework for the analysis of superhero myth, positing that Superman, and with him all other superheroes, must be viewed as mythic figures because of their presumptive perpetual publication model. He argues that the superhero narrative was the never-ending second act of a three-act structure. Superheroes were governed by what Stan Lee always called the illusion of change. That is, the narrative requires that, like all mythic heroes, the superhero faces a succession of Herculean tasks representing the allegorical threats of the society that birthed him. However, in order to continue the series ad infinitum and make money, the superhero is never allowed to enter the third act of his Campbellian monomythic journey. To Echo, locking the hero in the second stage through the illusion of change was the secret that allowed him to achieve mythic heroism. Much of Superman's classic appeal was the idea that no matter what the threat was in any given month, he was always absolutely going to defeat it. He was definitionally the greatest superhero. Other superheroes were measured in terms of their comparison to Superman. Who among us hasn't been in a comic book shop on a Wednesday and argued who would win in a fight between Batman and Superman? In fact, that very question has borne many comic books of all time, and it is the impetus for countless superhero tales over the years, some of them good, some of them less than good. And you know it, and don't at me. In any case, Martha-ness aside, narrative invulnerability is not limited to Superman and Batman. It is the hallmark of superhero fantasy across any medium. Even if we remove Echo's edict of mythic inconsumability and allow our superheroes to reach the third act of their monomythic journey, thus risking denouement and even death, the stories in which these occur are, by narrative convention, are always larger than life. I am Iron Man. After all, the character is superheroic enough to be invulnerable diegetically, then extra-diegetically, any force that can threaten said superhero must be equally exceptional. That is to say that to be a superhero is to be mostly beyond the pale of the mundane. Superheroes deal with super problems. At least other superheroes do. For Spider-Man, not so much. Well, maybe. In truth, there are many classic Spider-Man stories. You can often tell the age of a Spider-Man fan by asking him what the greatest comics or greatest villains are. And when you ask for the greatest one, people point to a formative story, usually from their youth when they started reading Spider-Man comics. So, are they a fan of Doc Ock's takeover with the superior Spider-Man? Do they love Venom and the rise of the symbiotes? No one loves the Clone Wars. Perhaps they love Kraven's Last Hunt, or maybe even remember the day that Gwen Stacy died at the hands of the Green Goblin, both of which appeared in the last couple of things. I'm no different. If someone asked me to speak to some of the greatest superhero arcs ever told, that speak to the titanic struggle between good and evil represented by the comics, these would be among my choices. In particular, these two would. The Goblin story where Gwen dies because of its historical significance, and the Kraven story, Kraven's Last Hunt, because as a child of the Bronze Age, that speaks to me as one of the most definitive comic arcs of all time. I would argue that in either of these stories, with the finality of death, at least temporarily, these work against Echo's idea of mythic consumption, at least for the villains who are arguably the protagonists of these two stories. I could even speak to Spider-Man's pathos in the stories and his determination to face trauma as the mark of what makes him a true hero. I'd be lying, just like Stan, but I could say that. For me, it's none of that. For the past 38 years, I have been keenly aware that the greatest Spider-Man story ever told was August 1985's Amazing Spider-Man number 267 by Peter David with art by Bob McLeod, When Cometh the Commuter. It is a story in which Peter Parker, the Amazing Spider-Man, is nearly defeated by the suburbs. He does not come into contact with an evil crime boss. No alien titan threatens to throw the suburbs into the sun. He does not come face to face with a supervillain named Suburb Man, this is what happens when you type Suburb Man into Midjourney. I wish he were, because Suburb Man is awesome. No, it's nothing like that. What actually happens is that Spider-Man pursues a regular middle-aged bank robber out of Manhattan and into the suburbs of Scarsdale, New York, where he learns that he is completely ineffective at crime fighting because the terrain is simply not set up for urban Spider-Manning. Without skyscrapers to swing from, and like the majority of native New Yorkers, lacking his own automobile, Spider-Man finds that his mobility through the suburbs is somewhere between that of a garbage truck and a 6-year-old girl riding a big wheel. She does offer to let him borrow it. It's adorable. Ultimately, Spider-Man does apprehend the suburban criminal, but only barely, and it's more through dumb luck and coincidence than anything else. Obviously, the commuter story was intended to be humorous, and it was played for laughs. However, it highlighted a very real anxiety that faced the Manhattanite of the 1980s, and it remains quite prescient to the urbanite of today. Regardless of his superpowers, which separate him from the common man, what really makes Peter Parker an outsider in this story is his inability to exist comfortably within middle-class, middle-aged world of suburbia. He simply cannot function. If anything, the story is more prescient today as a Gen X Peter Parker who cannot explain his struggles with bus fare, much less not having his own vehicle in New York City, to 1987 baby boomers, quite clearly mirrors the 2023 millennials' attempts to explain to contemporary Gen Xers, and oddly still baby boomers, that the inability to buy a house has more to do with stagnant wages than a love of avocado toast. This becomes particularly prescient in the following issue, a tie-in with Marvel's Secret Wars #2 crossover, where a tie-in with Marvel's Secret Wars 2 crossover, wherein rather than being concerned about the universe-threatening power of the Beyonder, Spider-Man's biggest immediate threat is that the federal government would rather destroy a surplus of gold that the godlike Beyonder created, rather than wreck the economy by redistributing wealth. This story, written by Danny Fingeroff and Tom DeFalco, with art by Mike Harris, Mike Zeck, Ron Friends, Joseph Rubenstein, and many hands of bullpen inkers, further complicates Peter's life by allowing him to learn that the federal government is willing to work with and pay off the kingpin of crime, a veritable representative of the 1%, by allowing him to keep a collection of priceless solid gold typewriters, whereas Spider-Man is tormented by a crisis of faith over taking a single golden notebook against orders of the government because the money it's worth could change his life forever. The following issues feature Spider-Man combating Firelord, a cosmically powered herald of Galactus who Spider-Man is able to only defeat by pure grit. The Spider-Lord story is particularly poignant for Spider-Man as a hero. He is painted as an underdog, punching above his weight class and only holding his own through his unwillingness to lose. It is a story of the domination of the human spirit in the face of unbeatable odds, and as he fights a villain who, from his perspective, is likened to a god. This is followed by Peter having just as much trouble fighting an enforcer for the mob named Manslaughter Marsdale, who is a little-known character whose superpower is that he has brass knuckles, and that he's black, I guess. It was the 80s. I'll talk about it. Well, he goes toe-to-toe with Spider-Man and nearly wins after he had just defeated Firelord. In neither case is the villain really that important, though. Throughout all of these issues, Peter is more concerned with his faltering love life, the health of his elderly Aunt May, the health of her boyfriend Nathan, a man in a wheelchair, and his perpetual money problems. The key element established through this run and much of Spider-Man is that while he does win, much like Superman, Batman, Captain America, Iron Man, the outcome is always in doubt. Rather than experiencing the vision of a hero that one can aspire to, we as readers are left with one question, one thought. I could do better. You probably could. Even fast forwarding to the modern day and seeing Peter Parker portrayed in the wildly successful Spider-Verse films, we see an aging Peter, a little thick around the midsection, whose wife has left him, who has a questionable relationship with sweatpants, whose real motivation is to mend his broken marriage. A problem that for him is bigger than the actual fight that he's engaged in. In the follow-up film, his biggest problem, the personal struggle, is minding his newborn child and wondering if he is a good father. While barely even noticing that there is a supervillain plot unfolding around him. In her book regarding the pain of others, Susan Sontag notes that historically humans are attracted to depictions of suffering of others on multiple levels. However, she notes, one can feel obliged to look at photographs that record great cruelties and crimes. One should feel obliged to think about what it means to look at them, about the capacity actually to assimilate what they show. While Sontag is more concerned with the ramifications of humanity's obsession with more visceral trauma, one must consider that repeat exposure to minor trauma is in effect the creation of greater trauma. If we are obliged to consider what it means to look at it, then we must consider that perhaps we traumatize Spider-Man because we like it. Yes, things always turn out all right. But in each case, the answer to the reader's question of, I could do better is, yeah, you probably could. The mythic inconsumability of Spider-Man means that Spider-Man must forever face Sisyphean suffering. The illusion of change means that even if the specifics of Spider-Man's trauma change, he will forever be doomed to nearly fall prey to them, regardless of how big or how trivial they are. Where Superman is definitionally a character who cannot fail, a role model that we can assume will always rise to the occasion, Spider-Man is our reminder that most of the time we will just barely make it. In a world where the majority of us are struggling with housing shortages, job insecurity, shrinking wages, imposter syndrome, global pandemics, the halls of government on the brink of falling to mob insurrection, fascist ideologues attempting to outlaw your career, and AI is coming to take your job. Superman may be the hero that we deserve, but Spider-Man is the hero that we need. Therein lies the strength of the character. He is not super in power, but in his faults. He is an exercise in a sort of super schadenfreude. He is the Marvel Universe's Charlie Brown, forever having the football pulled away from him before he could kick it, but always coming back for more. We delight in knowing not that we could be Spider-Man, but that we don't have to be. Because for all his power, on his best day, Peter Parker could only hope that maybe he's as good as we are. This formula has been copied to more and more superheroes over the years, lovable losers who can't get it together, and have become a genre trope that has been applied to Hawkeye, Mockingbird, Harley Quinn, Mr. Miracle, Peacemaker, Kite Man, hell yeah. Essentially the entire cast of The Boys, all of them are losers. Lovable losers. And if Spider-Man truly has a power, it's that he is the greatest loser of them all. And if he's still not quite as good as us, then maybe we're okay after all. Thank you.